Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Andrew Miller, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to have an expert panel on data integration trends and best practices. And our sponsors today are Actian, CData Software, and Dremio. For our presentations today, we'll hear first from James Kobielus with TDWI. And after Jim speaks, we'll be joined by Hassan Ali with Actian, Jared Johnson with CData Software, and Nick Atchison with Dremio for a panel discussion. Again, today we're going to be discussing data integration trends and best practices, and our first speaker is James Kobielus. He's the Senior Director of Research for Data Management at TDWI. Jim is a veteran thought leader, industry analyst, consultant, author, and speaker on analytics and data management. And over the past 3 decades, Jim has held analyst positions at Futurum Research, Wikibon, Forrester Research, Current Analysis, and the Burton Group. He also served as a senior program director for product marketing for big data analytics for IBM, where he was both a subject matter expert and strategist on thought leadership and content marketing programs targeted at the data science community. At TDWI, Jim focuses on data management, which encompasses database platforms, data governance, data integration, master data management, data ops pipelines, and more. Welcome, Jim. And with that, I'll hand it over to you for a moment.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good day wherever you are and whenever you are. So yes, today we'll have a panel, as Andrew presented, 3 expert speakers. So really, we're talking about data integration trends and best practices. You know, if you're just talking to some average person in your life and you're mentioning data integration, to them, it might sound dry, but it's nothing at all of the sort. In fact, data integration is one of the most fundamental investments that any business can make to drive better decisions. And so when we look at the purpose of high quality data integration is to make the best analytics informed insights from the best data and the best fit analytics models, and to drive those analytics and those insights from analytics into every decision. In order to do that, you need a high functioning, high performance, scalable, and agile data integration pipeline. And increasingly, in terms of best practices for data integration, TDWI research, we see that an established ongoing trend is that organizations continue to consolidate their data integration pipelines. In other words, the set of processes involved in ingesting, cleansing, transforming, and otherwise making ready for actionable insights, all of their data sources into high performance pipelines. In other words, workflows, processes that can make sure that the best data and best analytics are always driven deeply into the guts of the insights that inform or should inform every decision. So with that as a high-level thesis, I now hand it back to Andrew. And Andrew, please introduce our speakers.
Absolutely, yeah. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. And our first panelist is Hassan Ali with Actian. Hassan is a staff sales engineer with Actian, a division of HCL Software Data and Analytics, with over 15 years in experience in data integration and analytics space. He provides customer solutions by translating raw data into actionable insights and data-driven decision-making landscape. Our next speaker is Jared Johnson with CData Software. Jared moved through his life as a high school math and computer science teacher, developer, support engineer, and software developer before landing in his current role as senior technology evangelist for CData Software. Now a trusted thought leader and 10-year veteran at CData, he spends his time writing, demoing, and presenting best-in-class real-time data connectivity and integration solutions. And our final panelist today is Nick Atchison with Dremio. Nick is a senior product and strategy leader at Dremio. He has delivered digital and technological transformations at massive scale at organizations such as Nike, Zendesk, AEO, Philips, and the NSA. Prior to joining Dremio, he was the CDO at Okra. And with that, welcome all of our panelists. And Jim, I will hand it back to you to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Andrew. And welcome, panelists. Great to have all 3 of you on today's webinar. So let's just talk about, first and foremost, first question I have for you 3, and really any of you can jump in first. It's not really a competition. I'll let everybody have an equal chance to give us their thoughts. What are the hallmarks of modern data integration? What does it mean for data integration to be modern? Who wants to start?
I can jump in. This is Hassan. Okay, thank you, everyone. This is Hassan with Actian. I've been working, just to, as the introducer introduced us, I've been working with data integration for the past 15 years. And to answer this question based on that experience in the field, I've been a sales engineer working with clients from different domains and stuff like this. Really, there isn't one definition can define a hallmark of a modern integration. As we all know, the integration been evolving and the trends has been changing. So last year, maybe the hallmark was different than this year, and we continuously changes. So for example, really one of the, what I think the hallmark of modern data integration depends on the use case. For example, if you're running a use case that require a quick proposal for discount for online shopping, so really the hallmark for this use case will be real-time integration. So real-time integration will be the essential core hallmark for this use case. So real-time is the key, because we want to make a decision that will give us insightful information as the data get generated now, not a minute ago or last hour or yesterday. So real-time integration, I think, is a key element for having top-of-the-notch integration solution that will serve that particular use case.
Jared or Nick, do you want to add your 2 cents here?
Yeah, so this is Jared with CData. Again, thanks everyone for having me. And I think we can just key off of, I mean, ideally we'll be keying off of each other throughout this conversation, but I can key off of what Hassan was saying about tailoring everything to the use case. In that, you know, customers are going to need access to their specific data. Data engineers are going to need access to their specific data where they're used to working with it. So as you're building out your data integration solution, you want to be asking those data experts, those line of business users, where they want that data. So whether they've built their expertise in a specific BI tool, whether they've built their expertise in a specific reporting tool, whether they're leveraging, you know, some existing knowledge on machine learning or artificial intelligence, the key is going to be getting that data into a place, or getting access to that data in a way that is accessible from those tools, that energy, those resources that they've already spent to build that expertise to really find value. And the key here is that data is everywhere. You know, we're seeing this explosion in data. And so you have your CRM data, you have your ERP data, you have HCM data, and other 3-letter acronyms that we could throw out, you know, until we're ready to go home. But just making sure that you're aware of all of that data is, and that you have processes and procedures in place that gets it where it needs to be, so that your key value finders can really dig into that data, gain insights, and help your business to grow in the ways that it needs to grow.
Yeah, the ability to access, discover, and move the data to where it's needed, depending on what you're doing, what your role is. So Nick, any thoughts in this regard? I'm sure you do.
Yeah. No, and I'd say most of my career I've been on the other side of the table, probably with most of the folks on the call here. So it's only been the last few years that I really switched on this side. I think some of the stuff I was working on even 10 years ago, which we're really starting to see show up now across all data platforms, not just data movement, is just the incessant simplification, right? And or abstraction of the platforms itself too. My favorite example is like even when I was at Nike, I had 7 different data movement platforms that I owned at Nike when I joined. And, you know, part of this was just like, look, how do we make that invisible to users? Because at the end of the day, they just need data, right? They need data fast, they need data trusted, right? And we can kind of run down the line. And I think the hallmark, I think from a modern perspective, is how much can we continue to allow, 1, either abstraction, or 2, extremely simple self-service. And I don't mean self-service just for the data engineer anymore. You know, how do we get data to the business users faster?
Great. Simplification, self-service, and really an abstraction, a unified data model. I mean, put words in everybody's mouths, to speed the data to whoever is requesting to help them to find it more easily. Great. So let's move to the next question, which follows on this one. What trends are spurring enterprises to modernize their data integration capabilities? Why are enterprises moving toward simplified, abstracted, real-time data discovery and all that? What in the business world is really impelling them to do this?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. We'll go backwards this time. So one of my biggest problems, I actually was chatting with a friend of mine who's actually starting a data movement company literally right now. I was one of the initial people that built out NiFi back when I was at NSA and knew him back in those days. And we kind of incessantly talk about the same thing, which is, I honestly can't tell you most every company I've ever been at. I couldn't tell you where all of our data was at any given time and who was all using it. And as much as you want to say any individual data movement platform can provide, that insight, integrating and connecting that and governing that at an enterprise is just massively hard, right? And I think that's one of the things I think it's really starting to push companies, especially as, frankly, more people are actually going to jail now and fines are real, right? And before we used to just measure, hey, what's the risk of this being exposed and can I cover that and the cost of modernizing it? Is a real question. Now it's, there's much more difficult conversations being had and enterprises are facing real issues. So I think that's definitely a big push that's happening that's forcing companies to relook and go, hey, how do I scale this? And do that in a way that's trusted at the enterprise level.
With accountability and the chain of custody for data being trackable, traceable. Great. So that was Nick. So Jared or Hassan, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I can follow up with that. So I mean, just the idea of adopting platforms that enable this governance and this visibility. Your legacy data platforms weren't engineered with that in mind, and so I think one of the things that's spurring enterprises to modernize their integration capabilities is this idea that they need to modernize where their data sits. So as they move it from these legacy systems, possibly on-premise systems, into cloud systems that were engineered with this governance, with this observability, with this lineage in mind, with security in mind, they need to make sure that their integration capabilities are following along with that. And so CData actually has a customer, Office Depot. They had a legacy database and they adopted Snowflake, and they had built these analytics cubes on top of their legacy system. And as they started to modernize where their data was so that they could take advantage of all of these modern data governance capabilities, they realized that the analytics that they had built on top of their legacy systems weren't exactly one-to-one with Snowflake. And so they had to seek out a modern integration company, of which the three panelists here today are all employees of, to fill in that gap. And so, they get to continue to take advantage of all of the efforts that they had built on these analytics cubes and continue to find value from their data, but also take advantage of all of those, the governance, the security features that Nick was alluding to as they adopted this cloud-based data system. And it's not just Snowflake, right? There's the Google BigQueries, the Amazon Redshifts, that list goes on and on and on. But just making sure that, your integration processes, your integration pipelines are keeping up with all of the modernization that you're doing with the data itself.
Right. Platform churn's ongoing as everybody's moving all their data and analytics to a cloud of some sort or multiple clouds, making sure that your data integration pipeline is also evolving in the same direction towards the same architecture. Hassan, anything to add to what both Jared and Nick have told us?
Yes, absolutely. Technology will continue to evolve and the trends will be always emerging. And if you think about the purpose of having a modern or integration platform to really take advantage and take a full harness of the value of the data. As long as there is new emerging technologies, the enterprise need to be ahead of the game. So we should be able to take advantage of whatever data sizes, big data evolving, workload increases, API-led integration, a new application are being born every day. So in order for the enterprise to be ahead of the game, we need to think ahead of these technology changes and adopt with the changes. And that's what drives us to do more digital transformation, to accelerate the cloud adoption. So this is in the top of what my coworker said or my colleague said about legacy systems. You need to also keep up with legacy systems, data governance, and data quality.
So we've discussed what it means to have a modern data integration capability, what trends are driving enterprises to take that journey. So next question logically is how? How should they start? First of all, how should enterprises modernize their data integration platforms, processes, organizations? Well, how? What's the best practice here? Who wants to start?
Yeah, so I guess question number 3, I'll go first this time. I think one of the biggest things, and Nick alluded to this earlier, is that organizations may find themselves in a situation where they're using a lot of different, platforms or processes or pieces of software to handle their data integration, and that just creates a lot of overhead. And so you kind of have 2 options here in that situation, and that's the first is maybe you try to seek out one single solution, one single platform that can manage all of your data integration needs, so that you're able to handle those legacy on-premises systems, like what Hassan was talking about. You're able to handle the modern cloud data sources as well. But if that's not an option, and oftentimes it's not, then putting some sort of virtualization layer or a warehousing layer that ends up being the final source of truth on top of all of these different disparate processes and systems that you have in place. To just echo what Nick said earlier, that kind of hides all of that complexity from the end users who are really digging into the data. Because at the end of the day, your data is only as valuable as the value that you can find from it, the insights that you can gain from it. So just having something in place, whether that's a single system that manages all of your data integration or an additional layer or final resting point for all of your data, so that there's just one touch point for these line of business users, for leadership, even for IT admins as they're governing and managing the data, just to make everybody's lives easier.
Great. Hassan or Nick, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I can jump in. So in order for us to really get into the enterprise modernization and get on the process of that, first we need to identify the gaps and the shortcomings and the bottlenecks that we have in the current enterprise. And then after we assess where the gaps are, we can really start addressing these gaps with clear vision, clear goal in mind. As it's been mentioned, that simplicity, part of our work here at Actian, we try to develop a simple, easy to use solution that could be used by business analyst or data integrator or developer. So that platform should be able to handle all different users to use it, to cope with their skill levels. So really understand the gaps, see where the needs are with clear vision, and then develop. One of the critical, important key element, I think, is the iPaaS, to have the integration platform as a service that will enable different user personas to be able to use it. So,
right, because data integration is an organization of many different roles and skills and personas, all of whom play an important part. So they need tools that is suited to what they do as individuals. Nick, anything to add here?
Yeah, maybe taking a step back, I think we're at this interesting juncture in the data analytics architecture ecosystems, especially with the advent of lakehouse architectures, right? And I know Bob Underwood just asked a good question of is it realistic to even consider centralizing? I might re-ask the question is there a better way, right? Mm-hmm. So my favorite example is when I was at Zendesk, I had over 250 SaaS applications powering Zendesk, right? That's a lot of connectors and a lot of movement and integration. But even within those platforms, I had 70 of them plus were utilizing, enriching, moving, right, and sharing data all themselves. So being able to integrate, nobody has enough connectors to be able to fully centralize and manage all of this. But maybe the better question is, do you really have to? And I think that's some of the interesting stuff that comes around, with lakehouse architectures, right? You can actually simplify your footprint across your ecosystem with that no copy architecture, right? And minimize your movement. And to the question Lynn asked earlier, MSK and Regeneron are probably 2 really good examples here where I've seen them start utilizing this, right? Where MSK basically eliminated about 90% of their Kafka footprint, right? So within that 10% left, there's definitely a better way to manage that. So it's not saying get rid of Kafka, right? It's not saying, get rid of C data. Is there a better way to manage this, simplify your architecture, and think about things differently? And again, Regeneron was the same example where it took them months and a lot to be able to even just update reports because of the SLAs and SLOs and all the different downstream and upstream impacts of the data and the enrichments that were happening in each system. So I think, again, I think we're at this interesting juncture in the architecture movement itself, where, initially we had the separation of storage and compute. I think we're going to start looking at movement in a similar way and go, is there a better way?
Are you referring to the need for a no-copy architecture?
Yeah, I mean, we generally talk about a no-copy architecture, right? And I think this is some of the stuff we talked about beforehand, getting ready for the call, is if we separated data integration with data movement, I think the conversation becomes much different, right? And I think we can continue to optimize for each of those individual capabilities, and do best to fit architecture for companies. And my Regeneron example is, they themselves have purchased 3 or 4 or 5 different times of research data across their whole company, just because you didn't know what was happening in other parts. So again, this goes back to is when many platforms are talking about needing to integrate, maybe it's not a matter of having to connect all of them. There has to be a better way.
Great. I'll move to the next question. What are the core capabilities that are essential for deploying a full-featured enterprise data integration stack? Now, each of you is with a solution provider in this space, and I assume that you'll be mentioning the category in which your solutions play, but what is the full ecosystem of capabilities that an enterprise should stand up in their data integration pipeline to have what should be regarded as full-featured in terms of being able to address the core enterprise requirements? Anybody want to start here?
Hassan, you want to start again?
Sure, yeah. So when it comes to the core capabilities, we need to think in terms of capabilities that will ensure that we're running integration efficiently, we're running integration securely, we're running integration that gives us a trusted data, running data quality. We can increase the workload as the data increases. So if you think about core capabilities, in addition to the conventional ETL, ELT integration, we need to think about how can I have trusted data, and that will include core capabilities like data profiling, data quality, as such. So this is one of the core, is trusted data needs profiling and data quality. As you transform the data and unifying the data, you need to be able to trust the data that this is your the golden record that I can trust.
Right. So Jared, Nick, who wants to jump in now?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So Hassan covered, the idea of data quality, data security. So I'll chime in on a couple of factors, a couple of core capabilities that you're going to want as you're building or improving your data integration stack. And I think the first one that comes to mind for me is range of connectivity. And Nick, you alluded to the fact that like there are hundreds of data sources out there. You want to make sure that you're maximizing your connectivity across all of your data sources whenever you can. And this, I've alluded to this, I've said this before, this is going to include access to both on-premise data and cloud data. I think probably 2 years ago, everybody was super hot on the cloud. It was cloud this, cloud that, cloud everything. I think that was spurred on by, everybody having to go remote, and how do we get access to our data from our laptop workstations as we're 70, 100, 1,000 miles away from the home office. But that has shifted. I think that people are continuing to see the value in this on-premise data. And then I think separating this idea of integration as a concept of moving data, and integration as a concept of being able to connect to the data in that no copy scenario, and choosing that option when it makes sense based on the individual data source. So if you're looking at a replication situation, a migration situation, is it efficient? Is it well engineered? Does it support CDC, change data capture, for anyone that isn't familiar with that acronym, or other like Delta only movement and replication? So you're not replicating a full set of business data every time you run your pipeline. And then if you're looking at a no copy situation, is the data source that you're working with performant enough where that makes sense? Does it have streaming capabilities where you can hit an endpoint and just get this fire hose of data? Does it process data quickly? So are you talking about Google BigQuery, which is known for its both its ability to ingest and export data quickly. And then is your pipeline, is your connectivity solution engineered to take advantage of all of those capabilities? So whether you're doing a replication pipeline or you're doing this no copy situation where you can query the data, ad hoc, is your solution engineered to manage both of those capabilities?
Right. Nick, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe instead of repeating some of the other stuff, I'll take a slightly different road. Is when I went back to my example at Nike, where I had like 7 different movement platforms. One of the easiest way to frankly defund a few of those was just make sure there was a clear few tenants. Now on the platform itself, I'm like, look, at the end of the day, the data movement platform for me either gives me data at least once, only once, or maybe once, right? And if I can get those 3 things and I can handle fault tolerance, right? Especially when we talk about anything near real time, let alone real time, what happens when your pipeline breaks? It happens, right? And what happens if that's a high volume pipeline? Are you ever able to even get back to that near real time orientation? So again, I think it's the use cases really kind of drive how to think about these platforms. And frankly, that's why I've always kind of stuck with 2, 3, at most ever 4 platforms, because that maybe once, at least once, and only once is absolutely core to thinking about that data ingestion and data movement. And then this is where I go back to again, is just, ingestion is absolutely necessary. You need to be able to bring data into your ecosystem and take it outside of your ecosystem. How you think about data inside your ecosystem becomes the thing you want to push on.
Very good. Move on to the next question. Looking ahead, what emerging best practices in data integration are needed to support, the sophisticated new use cases we're hearing? Artificial intelligence like generative AI, distributed analytics across the multi-cloud, low latency streaming. So are all the standard toolkit of ETL and streaming and so forth suited to this new set of oncoming use cases, or is there a need for new types of technologies or best practices to support these, like generative AI? Let's just start with that. Any thoughts here? Data integration in the world of generative AI is what we have now, is what the enterprises have in place now is sufficient going forward?
Yeah, if I can kind of echo that no copy type of orientation, and I know there's an unidentified comment on Fabric. Maybe I'll stay away from Fabric for a second, and then more so focus on like the individual patterns that's being referenced there. And I think the reference there is we have fully integrated data ecosystems. And what does that mean, right? You still need an abstraction layer for unified access across those. But I think things like emerging in AI, what you're really seeing is how do I have fully integrated and complex search across not just all of my data sources, but also my pipelines as well, right? And I remember back in the day when I implemented Kafka for the first time, very in early years, part of this is like, hey, we need KSQL, right? And you're just like, well, how are you combining your pipeline analytics with your short-term and long-term analytics? And I think as we move to today, we're really talking about how do I do vector-based search across all of these different distributed sources as well, right? Because data isn't just stored in systems, right? In this case, it's in a pipeline in C data too, with some of our co-speakers here. So how do you continue to think about the open orientation of your ecosystem? Because at the end of the day, your user's not just asking for the data. What they're trying to do is solve a business problem with insights. That's the data enabling them to be able to do. So I think what we're seeing in AI is like the speed of being able to do that and integrate your sources everywhere.
You said the magic word vector. Vector databases are coming on fast and furious, especially in generative AI, because they have the vector embeddings are the core new type of data asset that needs to be managed in these environments. So that we could go on that. So I'm going to ask my other panelists, any thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think use cases are becoming more complex and more demanding, especially with the distributed analytics, artificial intelligence. And these usually lives in cloud, in several clouds, multi-cloud. So I think the emerging data integration best practice is needed to be able to connect to the data sources, regardless where it lives, on premise or on multi-cloud or on hybrid. You would like to be able to really connect to the data wherever it lives at any time to bring it, to ingest it, and to be able to deploy that solution also on the cloud or in premise, or deploy it as a hybrid solution. Applications nowadays require low latency, and low latency application. In order for us to keep up with the demands, we need to have real-time data integration. As the data is being generated, we need to count these data in to be part of the data that we want to run analytics on. And the discussion is really big, but I'll leave it to that point, is to be able to connect across multi-cloud on-premise and to be able to deploy anywhere, anytime.
Great. Jared, any things to add here?
Yeah, so I mean, Nick and Hassan both did a great job, I think, covering probably the two key points that I would have hit. So I'll go for my third point that I've got a note on, and that's this concept of data lineage and observability. And Nick alluded to this earlier, and Hassan has said, mentioned data governance and knowing what your data is. Nick, you said, for the last question, what happens when the pipeline fails? So just observability, not just into the data, but into the pipelines as well. But this idea of real-time or near real-time lineage and observability. So you can see exactly when a data point changed. You can see all of the different pieces of your data integration system, ecosystem pipeline that are affected by that change, so that you know where your data is, what state it's in at all times. And this is really important for artificial intelligence, because you can really only trust the answers from AI based on the data that goes into it and the data that you have at hand that it's making predictions on, or that it's trying to gain insights from. So if you can't trust that data because it's stale, because a pipeline failed, you want that alert that the pipeline failed long before you ever generate that report. And this concept of data lineage, data observability, those platforms and applications that provide that are going to be able to give you that peace of mind when it comes to knowing that your AI is giving you the answers to the questions that you want, and those answers are accurate.
Right, and also peace of mind knowing that you have accountability and transparency in terms of the entire chain of custody of data and models prior to an AI application making an inference, because there might be regulations and laws that are applicable here that might require you to go to a court of law to demonstrate that you use due diligence to make sure it's performing as it should. So with that said, I'm going to move on to the next question. What new techniques should enterprises consider for reducing the cost and improving the efficiency of their data integration processes? Some call this FinOps, financial operations. So what new techniques for cost management and control of data integration are there?
Yeah, so I'll kick this one off. We've said no copy several times. This idea of allowing your business data to stay where it is and still be able to get valuable insights from it through analytics, whether that's in-place analytics, distributed analytics, is really key. I don't know anybody who's maybe using a major CRM, but it can be pretty expensive to keep your data there, and so you have to make the choice of, would you have a copy of that data somewhere else too? So now you're paying for that storage twice. If you can build an integration system or adopt an integration platform that allows you to leave data in place and still be able to query it from the tools that you're used to working with, your Power BIs, your Tableaus, your other analytics platforms, then I think that's probably one of the newer techniques that we're seeing people adopt in order to help reduce that cost. So you're not paying for the storage in the SaaS application and in the either like the on-premise database or the cloud database or some hybrid situation.
Right, keep storage costs as low as possible. Hassan or Nick, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. This is a very important topic and area that many customer, it's in their mind. Their data is just growing. The volume of the data is not going down. As data grows, cost goes up. So enterprise need to think about ways to save money and reduce the cost and keep the performance the same way or better. So one key concept that we have on that is pay for what you use. So you can containerize your solution, create microservices. You run them as needed and turn them off when it's not being utilized or worked. So that would help really pay for what you use when you deploy to the cloud, because this is one of the benefits of running on the cloud is you only pay for what you use. And when you deploy your integration there, you can achieve and hit that milestone. Other ways to save cost and keep performance and improvement in there is create data virtualization. You don't have to copy the data, as my colleague said. You can just create a virtualization view of that data without having to copy it and move it. Creating data fabric to be able to orchestrate all these connectivity within a data fabric that will really help you manage your data elements and data quality and metadata in a secure way, in a contained way, more efficient way, less processing power. So really, there's a lot of things to talk about here, but this is probably key component is to create a cloud-based ETL iPaaS solution to take advantage of the cloud economics.
Great. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I obviously love those first two answers. So maybe if I can add on to that, maybe in a slightly different perspective is, as I mentioned, I had this call earlier this week with my buddy who's founding another company in this space. And, the one thing he just kept going back to, even within, the customers he interacted with was, like Kafka, right? Kafka, you'll have 10 plus pipelines running at any given time with, frankly, a lot of them pushing and managing the same exact data, right? People don't know all the time what pipelines are actually already even out there or how to easily manage those pipelines or even search across them, right? So I think it's super interesting to see is like, how do you continue to go, what reuse is within my ecosystem available, right? And I think as you think about, and you take the no copy example, and you go, okay, now you've simplified. Now with that simplification, how do you continue to optimize, right? And I think most people are already looking at that like Snowflake, right? How do I optimize my spend there when everybody's running a lot of the same analytics across their own ecosystem? I think the same thing happens here, is how do I simplify and then mature the pipelines that I actually have running so you can drive better trust within your ecosystem while also driving down cost. So I think a lot of these things obviously have connective tissue.
Excellent. Pipeline reuse, virtualization, using a integration platform as a service, no copy architecture. Those are great. That's great advice. So how feasible, let's move to automation. We're hearing more and more about automation as essential for modern data integration pipelines. How feasible is it for enterprises to entirely automate their data integration processes? Or is that foolhardy? Anybody want to jump in first on this?
Yeah, I can jump in. I don't think fully automated enterprise integration is going to be all plus. Automation is great. It has many benefits, and it has also some disadvantages. Automation will enable more personas to be able to use the integration platform. It doesn't have to be a technical person. Business analyst can use it. Automation can work with simple data sources, simple structure, consistent schema, dealing with no change, not a lot of changes. That will really pays a lot and make things easy. But when it comes to complex use cases, automation might be partial automation. It can't probably be fulfilled fully because you want to be able, when you read complex data, you want to make sure you ingest that data, you transform the data, and you qualify the data, profile it. You want to be able to trust it. If you do full automation with changing schemas, changing structures of data, it's going to be tough to automate. But automation really is great, for example, to automap, to do automapping, to automatically detect schema and take action. I think that's amazing. That's some of the work we're doing, is to automatically connect to a source and pull the schema automatically. And that's the kind of work can help. But as far as complexity situation, probably is going to be tough to pull a full automation integration.
Great. Jared and Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I'll jump here. One of the fun parts of the feasibility, right, isn't always just about can I connect to it. It's more about like, how does you're pulling the data in for a reason. Even if, frankly, the data is dark, right, there's going to be a reason for it later. But majority of the time, the data is getting pulled in to help solve a business problem. That's why we generally talk about it, and that's why people get woken up at night. I think a lot of the feasibility starts coming down to like, how do we think about, kind of building on Hassan's point, metadata drift, right? And not just even the schema inference and schema modeling. How do we think about problems, especially as we just talked about, within a virtualization layer and unified analytics across an ecosystem? How do you think about a 1% difference, which is within the threshold and tolerance for 5 or 6 or 7 different systems? I had a fun example back in when I was running, some of these platforms, and I had architects coming to me going, "Hey, I need a 99.35% uptime." I'm like, "Where'd that number even come from?" They're like, "Well, these 4 systems have 99.3 published on their site." And I'm like, "The math doesn't work that way." 4 99.3s don't make 99.3. But what do we actually need? What are we solving for? And what's the impact of it not being right? And how do we really want to think about the evolution of the data over time? Because you have the metadata drift, you have schema drift, you have model drift as an output of that and downstream, especially when you're running multi-models over each other. So I think the feasibility comes is like, how sophisticated is your organization to be able to tech these, not just at the system level, but across. And I think that starts to answer how automated can I be?
Right. Jared, your thoughts?
Yeah. So, we'll just kick off of that. The idea that, your modern tooling is going to have some level of automation, whether that's a self-built ETL pipeline, whether that's some platform that you've adopted, it's going to have this idea of automating, the movement of data across different systems from point A to point B. Modern tooling and platforms are going to have, these concepts for, scalability, failover, and things like that. But, I think like my colleagues here, I'm going to push back on the feasibility of always automated in that there's also a huge need for, ad hoc and exploratory processes when it comes to looking at data, analyzing data, finding insights from data. As you adopt a new system or your system changes, as that model changes or that schema changes, as Nick was talking about, you need ways to not have to wait for IT to update the pipeline. You need ways where you don't have to wait for your developer to push a new release in order to get access to that data to explore it, to build just a simple report or a simple visualization. And what's great is that, as you develop this ad hoc process, as you're exploring the data, you can eventually automate that. So I think there's this push to kind of drive towards automation, but there also needs to be allowance for these ad hoc exploration processes that let you kind of just be free with the data and do with it what you need to when you need to do it, and not have to wait for the data to land in the warehouse or the lake or wherever it is.
Great. We'll move to one last of the pre-scripted questions before we move to the questions that are coming in from our audience members. So that was a great discussion of automation in the context of data integration. This is a question pertaining to what sometimes is called like the citizen data engineer, the non-traditional data integration professional, perhaps a business analyst or another role. To what extent can and should enterprises provide self-service tooling to help data scientists or business analysts or other non-traditional data integration professionals, as it were, to build and deploy the sophisticated logic needed to stand up these pipelines? Anybody have any thoughts here? Should this be something we ask the non-traditional data engineers, as it were, to do?
Yeah, I'm a believer of this self-service tooling. It provides basically filling the gaps of complexity to make the complex task easier. Basically, we hide all these complex coding behind the scene and have a visual tool that will do click, drag and drop, make things easy, that will enable business analysts to really use it. I think self-service tooling is one of the steps forward toward fully automating the solution. The more of these toolings we create, the more we make the system easier to work with. There's no need for complex coding. It's just drag and drop, wizard-driven task, 1, 2, 3. Basically, you log in to a system, you'll find the tool, connect, click, a couple of clicks, deploy a couple of clicks and maybe one click. I mean, we have one of the goals is to do one click to get things done. So of course, tooling is important. It's cost saving. You can do the task faster, and you can validate, and you feel more confident. There are some challenges to that. If you give tooling without training, they might be doing something wrong, but always training is important. And you don't want to tool everything. You want to tool the complex task that will make things easy for you to connect and extract and transform and load to enable all personas to be able to work with it.
Excellent. So Nick or Jared, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll just piggyback off of what Hassan was saying, in that, you want this self-service tooling. You want your line of business users to be able to get access to that data, but not everything needs to be self-service. And I think, as you're adopting tools and platforms and applications, IT is involved in some way, right? You don't want it to be the Wild West for business users. You don't want them, accidentally getting right access to, the production database. So, they accidentally, drop a table or whatever the case is. But that IT could be internal IT, your team that's building and maintaining these pipelines, or it could be the IT resources of the tool and platform that you've adopted. So, as you're, adopting, a tool like One CData produces, or Actian produces, or Dremio produces, you're trusting their IT resources to have engineered their tools in such a way that it makes it self-service for the line of business users. And our thought is that ultimately data integration is going to be a partnership between the business unit and the IT unit, and the best solutions, the best stacks around data integration are going to ease the burden on both of those parties. So your line of business users have access to the data that they want. They can explore it freely without fear of accidentally breaking something within the operational system. And IT teams are going to be best equipped to get access to data, to build and maintain the integration layer, virtualization layer, the pipeline, or whatever the case is.
Great. Nick, any thoughts?
Yeah. I like to start with stories. The two biggest breaches I've ever been involved with were data scientists creating and managing their own pipelines. Right. And so I think that's the caution generally as a starting point to say, what does self-service look like? Self-service often looks like that. And it takes one or two incidents, right, to change a perspective. That said, it's not changing trajectory. So I think we think about things like, Dremio, we talk about like an autonomous lakehouse. If we talked about autonomous pipelines in a similar fashion, right, and I think that's where you start thinking about like, what would that look like? And it may not be fully automated, but certain things absolutely will, right? So we think about not just pipeline generation, but also like pipeline matching, right? So how do I make sure that I can even consume in other pipelines without, again, having to wait weeks, if not months or quarters, to be able to get access to that data? So if I do need to generate it, can you make sure that I'm this tall to ride the ride without knowing I am, right? So what are some of those requirements to be able to get access to be able to self-serve those? But then there's other things that we can do ourselves too, to go, hey, are we landing that data and helping the engineer later on? Can we land that in the appropriate format, right? Can I ship that into an iceberg format from another source, for example? If we can do those for the users, one, they don't care, but two, we continue to open up the ecosystem and platform to be able to continue to drive best practices. So I think there's definitely, like, we're going to have to do this, right? We're going to have to enable self-service. There's no question there. Otherwise, people are going to do it anyway, and breaches are going to happen. So I think it's understanding how tall does your organization need to be, and then how do we enable folks to be able to self-service safely while continuing to push forward with a new modern architecture.
Very good. Thank you, panelists. Now I'm going to hand it back to Andrew. We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so let's take it away. Audience Q&A.
Yeah, thank you all very much. That was a great conversation. We'll move into the audience Q&A here. I'm going to start with Jared, but of course, Hassan or Nick, if you have something to add after he's done, please do so. Okay, so Jared, first question. Data security and access control is top of mind for all CIOs and IT teams. How would you approach this problem and address the data governance demands of the enterprise companies?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. And for CData, for anyone that isn't familiar, we make data connectivity solutions. It could be as simple as a software library that allows you to connect to something like QuickBooks from Excel, to these higher value products where we have a data connectivity service that sits in the cloud that provides cloud to cloud connectivity. And I think one of the things that you're going to want to look into is whatever solution you're using, and CData does this, is you want to make sure that you're engineering security into every step of the pipeline. So as you're pulling data from a source like Salesforce or HubSpot or QuickBooks, that you're leveraging all of the security options that are available there. That you're using proper authentication to pull data or to access data from these operational systems, and then you're also leveraging all of the security that is baked into wherever the data is going to land, whether that's into a warehouse or that's into an analytics tool or platform, and then making sure that you're properly managing access to that data in those systems. So you're partnering with your IT teams to make sure that you're using the right user accounts with whatever system you're working with to make sure that the right people have access to the right data and they don't have access to the wrong data, so that you don't end up in this situation where there's a data breach because the data scientists have decided to build their own pipelines instead of partnering with IT.
Still too soon, Jared. Still too soon.
My bad.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question here. Hassan,
yeah,
this will be for you.
I want to add one more
please.
point. Yes. Yeah. In addition to what Jared said, data encryption at rest and motion is very critical when it comes to security. We should be able to really encrypt the data when stored and in motion until we send it to the destination. We can even send it as encrypted or encrypted if it's going to a dashboard for business analyst or business intelligent dashboard.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that addition. We'll move on to the next one now, but Hassan, this is for you. So the need for integrating data as it's being generated is becoming essential to be able to make an accurate decision. What would you do for a real-time integration?
Yes, real-time integration, I mentioned that many times, is actually a key to our end customers. As data is being generated, we need to capture that data, and we have a solution called Data Connect, Avalanche Connect. We have in place event-driven listeners, HTTP listeners, API listeners, file listeners. Whenever there's a movement or data changes or order came in or somebody logged in, we capture that and we take action. And that integration runs. One use case would be, we have one of our customers, as their end customer, they shop online and pick an item. We would want to be able to take that item, add it to our data warehouse, and then run a query to be able to suggest a matching product and or suggest a discount for another product. So in order for us to do this, we need to run our integration tools with our data warehouse to be able to really capture the moment as it happens and take action within seconds. So that's, we have tools, we have our solution offer that real-time integration as soon as the data is being generated.
All right, fantastic. We'll move on to the next question here. Nick, you're up on this one. How do you see data movement or data integration changing in the trend of data products, and how might data mesh or fabric fit in here?
Yeah, I know that's popped up in the Q&A box a few times too, and I think we've highlighted that quite a few times on this call, especially as we kind of talked about no copy architecture. I think if you look at some of these, from a unified access perspective, Snowflake's a great example, right? Snowflake popped up and blew up because people needed cloud agnostic sources to be able to move all their data to be able to do analytics, right? So everybody started building all their connectors, right? Kafka blew up again to be able to move all the data in Snowflake. But again, new technologies continue to come out and say, hey, I can still get the same speed of a warehouse, but then have the simplicity and cost of a data lake. And I think, some of those trends and changes are dramatically altering which problems that organizations are thinking about, and then also how to address them, right? So it brings much more now to the forefront governance, right? Because now with that simplification and unified access, again, it changes how you start thinking about the data itself, how it's managed, and who even owns it. Because Fabric and Mesh at the end of the day require absolute requirements into a pub sub architecture, into things like a metadata ecosystem as well. And it shines a bigger light on that. So again, all these things have connective tissue, but I think a lot of these trends around Mesh and Fabric is more specifically Mesh is about speed, Fabric about centralization. But they're definitely pushing the bounds of saying, hey, I need data faster, right? And I need to be able to trust that data more consistently. And my last point here is, I think what you'll start seeing really pushing in the next year or two is data contracts. Now, as you simplify your ecosystem, having more trust in those contracts of that data and the trust in that data.
All right, well, that was fantastic, and unfortunately, we have run out of time today. So please allow me to thank our speakers. We did, of course, hear from James Kobielus with TDWI, Hassan Ali with Actian, Jared Johnson with CData Software, and Nick Atchison with Dremio. I'd also like to thank once more Actian, CData, and Dremio for sponsoring today's webinar. And from all of us here, let me say thank you so much for attending. This does conclude today's event.